I'm very honored to share my research about community of inquiry or the online language learning part to everyone. My training is related to applied linguistics, but then I got interested in educational technology. And my, as Edward said, my overarching theme is to look at how technology can be used to facilitate online language learning. So today I'm going to share a couple studies I've done that is related to online language learning. I'll use community of inquiry as the overarching theme, as a framework, so that by the end of the session, you can understand how, as a researcher or as a instructor, you can use community of inquiry to design a course that can facilitate students' learning. So we don't have a lot of people here, so if you have any questions, you can leave comments in the chat room. If I see it, you can definitely type it, and maybe I can answer your question earlier. So today my agenda is first talk about online language learning trend, and then explain the community of inquiry as a framework. I'll talk about gaps in community of inquiry. Later, I'll refer that to COI, and then share our recent findings on how to improve community of inquiry. So online learning has been a trend even before the pandemic. In Hong Kong, it's a little bit different. I think when I first came to Hong Kong in 2017, there's no online teaching. One time I planned to attend a conference in the States, and then I said, could I do online teaching? And my colleague said, no, we don't do online teaching. But it has been a trend for a long time. You can look at the statistic. Over 100 million students worldwide have enrolled in open online courses. This is through formal education, but the number of students taking online, using online language resources is way beyond that. You can see from Coursera is 20 million people every year. In the United States, the number of students taking online courses rose from 2.6 million in 2012 to 3.5 million in 2019. We don't have the recent number yet. This is the most recent one we can get from the States. You can also see that if students have the choice after they take online courses, they still prefer to take online courses. If we focus on the online language learning part, you can see that these are popular online language learning resources. Maybe you can recognize some of them, like Duolingo. The Wikipedia and the Duolingo website claim that they have 300 million people using it. Also, other Memorize, Busuu, Babel, they also have a lot of users using that as a way to learn a new language. But how about, you can also see it from these states. This is just from 1 month. In February 2022, Duolingo has 8 million downloads, and these are other popular apps. You clearly see that language learning, especially out-of-school language learning, has a lot of potentials. The statistics predict that the market share will increase significantly over the next few years at least until 2030. But the thing is that we still have a lot of things we don't know. One common question is online language effective or more effective than face-to-face one? Now we are past beyond these questions. The next question people are asked, is what kind of things can predict language learning outcomes? What explain differences of learning in online language learning courses? So here I started to contextualize, to focus more on formal education online language courses instead of out-of-school online learning using other resources. So I will first introduce cognitive inquiry, which I refer to COI as a framework back to like 2000, where the internet started. People are started to use it as a way to engage students. Garrison et al. Proposed a seminal work that highlight the importance of three components in language learning, which is social presence, teaching presence, and cognitive presence. They said that in order to have a desirable educational experience, you need to have three together. I will later introduce each of them, and a lot of work are based on cognitive inquiry, but I may just focus on one component at a time, and I started to build it, and then I started to refine the cognitive inquiry framework. So the first one is cognitive presence. Cognitive presence is the extent to which learners are able to construct meaning through sustained reflection and discourse. For example, cognitive presence doesn't say it's individual or collaborative process. It can be both. So if students learn something, they read something, definitely a cognitive presence. The next one is the social presence. As it suggests, social presence is the ability of participants in the cognitive inquiry to project their personal characteristic into the community. Here, I want to highlight the personal characteristic, and thereby presenting themselves to other participants as the real people. So it sounds abstract, but when you discuss a question with peers, it definitely projects your personalities into the discussion, because your input will based on your background. And that's why we like diverse students with diverse background, because they can bring different opinions. So I don't know about your school, but currently there are lots of schools or a lot of online courses that has like hundreds of people. What do you think of this class? Do you like this one? We still have tutorial. We still have math lecture with 400 people at Hong Kong U. So this is definitely not desirable based on the cognitive inquiry, because in that kind of setting, you cannot project your personality, or you cannot bring your personal opinion into the math lecture unless instructor use other ways to engage your learners, such as some input, a lot of like Nearpod or other thing, they can allow students to participate. So that will make some differences. But if this is the case, one study I did is about online class size. Because when online language learning or online learning starts, people start to ask, is bigger classes better? I like small classes. Can I enjoy small class? But small class is very expensive. Is the cost justifiable? At that time, people think that if technology allow instructors to reach more students, we should capitalize it and to teach more people, providing quality educational materials to more people, then it's a success. And it also reduce educational costs. But people tend to like small classes better. So do we keep our class small or do we keep class large? So based on the social presence, you can probably guess, maybe you need to have a right size, but what's the right size? So I did a study that that survey. I work with the virtual school where all the students took online courses through them. I work with this school, get all the student data, all the classes data, and then I look at the relationship between class sizes and their final grades. I found this parabolic regression fitting line, which means that if the class size decrease below the threshold, their final grade started to decrease. If the class size is beyond the threshold, it also decreases students' achievement. This is a very interesting study because previously in face-to-face settings, people are looking at this area and said, if we decrease class size, we can have more interactions, which is exactly what social presence is about, because students can participate in the class. But if we think about this part, if we are beyond the threshold, it also connected to social presence very well, because at that time, you get too many customers, you don't even have a chance to speak out. So in online learning, it's very concerning. We need to have a right size. We need to have an optimal size. Please note that my study doesn't recommend the exact class size, because it depends on the local context. This is just a finding from a school. It may not generalizable to other contexts, but this is just one study I did that's related to social presence. The next, I want to move to teaching presence, which is the essence of what teachers do in class. But here, so the teaching presence is the design, facilitation, and the direct instruction of the educational experience. Here, I want to point out that here, Garrison et al.'s framework said that it's a teaching presence instead of teacher presence, because it can be done through others. So teachers can design it, and designers can also design and facilitate it, and peers can also do that. So they call it teaching presence. So now we have a framework, and our questions remains. We still have a lot of questions. At that time, cumulative inquiry is a conceptual or theoretical framework. It doesn't get quantitative or qualitative support to back up the story. Theoretical concepts are only useful insofar as they can be linked to empirical data. This is the view I hold. I think we need to validate the conceptual framework so that we can use the conceptual work properly in our teaching and learning. Thankfully, before I did it, Peter Shea from University of Albany did the work. They developed survey items based on the framework Garrison et al. Proposed, and they validated. It clearly shows that teaching presence and the social presence together predict cognitive presence. You can overlook this part. You just focus on these three parts. So teaching and social, where teaching and social presence will enhance cognitive presence. This is a simplified model. Teaching presence will facilitate social presence, but teaching presence and social presence together have direct impact on the cognitive presence. So this is a very clear model. It further discuss how this works. If teachers can design group tasks that can facilitate social presence. So this line is clear. If classes have some discussions, it can engage learners so that they have more cognitive presence. If teachers do direct instruction or strategy teaching, it also enhances cognitive presence. So this model makes sense. But is this enough? Before jumping that, this model provides a very good statistics. It says that 70% of variance in cognitive presence can be accounted for by social and teaching presence. So this is a huge amount. We cannot directly link cognitive presence to learning or learning outcome, but it explains a significant amount of variance. Then students who perceive high social presence believe they learn more. So it gives us a foundation to create social presence in online courses. Chin-Hsi's study is situated in higher education, and they did the study across the subject. It's not situated in language learning. So my burning questions remains the same. How about online language learning? Can we find the same thing in online language learning courses? I use a different framework, but that's similar to cognitive inquiry. At that time I used Moore's framework, which categorized three major interactions. The first one is learner-teacher interactions. If teachers teach to students or have some discussion with students, dialogical teaching, this is learner-teacher interaction. The second one is learner-learner interaction, group work, peer discussion, peer review, this kind of thing related to learner-learner interaction. The third thing, learner content interaction, is how when students are engaged in learning the content. And this framework is very similar to cognitive inquiry because at that time I used this interaction, three types of interaction as a proxy to study the cognitive inquiry. Learner-teacher interaction is part of the teaching presence. Learner-learner interaction is related to social presence, and the learner content interaction is cognitive presence. So I use Moore's framework as a proxy to do cognitive inquiry, and here is what we found. We did this study at the virtual school in the United States. For virtual school, it means that all the courses offered in this school is online. It doesn't have a campus. But in the United States, if the students are taking online courses, they normally they are still registered in their local brick and mortar school, but they can take online courses through virtual school. So virtual school, you can think it as a provider of online courses, because some courses are very difficult to find the quality teachers. For example, a lot of rural areas, students still want to learn a foreign language, for example, like Chinese, but they may not find the Chinese teachers in their local area. So students need to fulfill the graduation requirements. So they resort to virtual school to fulfill the requirement. And some students want to take advanced placement courses so that they can get in college easier. But schools may not have enough students to hire a teacher to teach that course. So this is probably the background of why students in the United States take online courses, mainly educational access to courses, and some are based on conflict of schedule, a lot of things. So this is the regression or path analysis we did to understand how these three types of interactions predict learning outcomes. In the first model, I put in students' background, like a gender and the reasons why they took online courses. It is a credit recovery, they fail one class, they need to take it, or it's a requirement, but they could not find it. And in the second model, in addition to this background information, I added the motivation part, intrinsic motivation, extrinsic motivation, and self-efficacy. You see that from model 1 to model 2, motivation explained a significant amount of almost 41% of variance by the motivation. And model 3 added additional variables, which is the learning strategy. So motivation, at that time, I used another framework called self-regulated learning, which consists of two major parts. One is motivation, and the second one is learning strategy. So I wanted to argue that self-regulated learning explains a lot, but these three types of interaction can explain additional variance beyond already powerful motivation and strategy predictor. So in model 4, we plug in 3 additional variables, which is the 3 types of interaction. The outcome here is satisfaction. So you can see that here, learner-instructor interaction and learner-content interaction predict the outcome. And it adds about 10% of variance. So our total model explains 67% of the outcome, which is satisfaction. So here, learner-teacher interaction, learner-content interaction explain satisfaction. This is just one outcome, because in online courses in the States, satisfaction is a very powerful predictor, and it's very distinct. It's from final grades. So I use satisfaction. And the second outcome we use is the perceived progress. So the model is similar. This is the background, which explains 10%. Adding motivation bump up to 66%, and adding self-regulated learning strategies, it's for 74%. And but this type of interaction, only one predicted, which is learner content interaction. So learner content interaction also positively correlated to their perceived progress. So putting it together, we clearly see that students engaging in learning process increase their satisfaction, and they think they learn more. Teachers direct instruction or design of the courses, they feel they are satisfied. So if we want to get high grades, You need to talk to students or teach. But if they want to feel they are learning, this may not work very well. You just need to have them in the class. At that time, social presence, this part, social presence doesn't have any significant relationship with the two outcomes. Because of the context I did research is self-paced asynchronous online courses where they took they can theoretically finish their course in one day if they can complete all the assignments. So this is very different. They do not have a weekly schedule. They just the instructor just put everything online. They can some students do that weekly, some students do that periodically, some students complete the course at the very last minute. So this is the context. Based on students' different schedules, there wasn't a lot of social interaction in the class. This is probably why we found there's no significant relationship between social interaction and the two learning outcomes we had at that time. So based on the based on the cognitive inquiry part, we added these two, teaching presence and cognitive presence, which lead to better learning outcome. So, but do that answer all our questions? Think about it. Is there anything missing from the model? Yeah, actually, a lot of things are missing. So, Chin-Hsi from 2010, they started to promote one thing, which is learning presence. Learning presence here is learners are attempting to accomplish goals that are not accounted for within the cognitive inquiry framework. And learning presence refers to whether online learners are metacognitively, motivationally, and behaviorally active participants in their own learning processes. Looking back, one big regret is that at that time, I did not frame my prior study using the cognitive inquiry. If you see this clearly, my study, I already added the self-regulated learning. This is the part they are referring to, which is the learning presence. So my study already showed that the learning presence and the cognitive inquiry, how it works together to affect students' learning outcome. So they validated the model. They added learning presence and showed empirical support that social presence and teaching presence can enhance learning presence, which in turn increase cognitive presence. So when I saw this model, I spent a lot of thoughts and thinking, oh, they did this part. Can I improve their model? I think this is a good model. It explains a lot, but is it solid? Yeah, they definitely provide empirical support, but can I do better? Yes, definitely. Learning presence, they operationalize as a two-component thing. One is self-efficacy, the other is effort. If you remember, previously they said that they want to see the learners are metacognitively, motivationally, and behaviorally active participants. But their part only look at the motivation. They do not look at the self-regulated learning part. So this is their model. They split this into two components, self-efficacy and effort. So teaching and social presence predict self-efficacy, which in turn predict effort, and effort predict cognitive presence. The direct impact of teaching and social presence remain the same to cognitive presence. So this is their model, and based on their work, I started to think what are gaps and how can I improve their model. It took me several years to figure out. So here are several research gaps I see in their model. The first is in their model, I don't know why they did not link to learning outcomes. I guess it's probably they surveyed thousands of students in their university, and they are cross-discipline. So there is no easy way to get their final grades. Even if they got the final grade, whether they are comparable is a concern. There is no quality measure or assessment guideline across different discipline. So even if they can get it, it's probably hard to justify why this is a good measure. So they did not link it to learning outcome. So we know this is important. We see this can explain cognitive presence, but does cognitive presence linked to learning outcome? We don't know. The second is their studies were situated in higher education. They did not focus on K-12 settings. They did not focus on online language learning part. So I wanted to situate it more in K-12 settings, especially high school settings. The third is learning presence did not align with self-regulated learning framework. As I showed earlier, self-regulated learning should involve the metacognition part. They involve the motivational component, but they did not have the metacognition part, which is I didn't know why, but I think that's a flaw, and that's a very clear research gap. So here is what I did. I found several research gaps, and I want to provide solutions in my follow-up study. So here I added the 3 different outcomes. I added satisfaction, perceived progress, and grades. They did the study in higher education. I contextualized the study in online settings, in online high school settings. They had the learning presence, but I operationalized the learning presence differently from theirs. I believe that self-regulated learning strategies based on our prior study has a very strong and significant effect on learning outcomes. So I added self-regulated learning strategy on top of the self-efficacy. Then I did a study to see how we can refine the cognitive inquiry. I found a state virtual school in the Midwestern United States. The virtual school is a nonprofit organization overseen by the state. As I mentioned earlier, students who want to take online courses, you can see virtual school as a portal to enroll in online courses. In the United States, students may not be required to attend the online courses in a particular time, but some students do. So maybe from 10 to 11, they can go to the library and study an hour for one online course. But they are not required to do so in school. They can go back home and study as they wish. This is participants attended local brick and mortar schools unless they are doing some charter schools. So, but most of students in the context attend local brick and mortar schools on a full-time basis. So they are full-time students in other schools. They just take 1, 2, some students take 3, courses in this virtual school. So I'm looking at their online language courses. These courses are self-paced, asynchronous online courses, which is very typical in the United States. This is how they find the quality, because these are overseen by the states. Each state has different quality measures. Each school also have this review process. So these virtual schools normally find vendors that they can buy licenses for the students. So teachers just imported this already developed content, and they can do some minor tweaking. And every like 2 years, each course will be reviewed and see if they meet the standards outlined by the school or by the state. So these courses are commonly self-paced and asynchronous. I mean, in the school I did, it's all self-paced, but in other virtual school, it's all most of them are also self-paced. A student was assigned an offline adult mentor at her or his local school. This is very unique design in the United States. I think this is a very smart design, because children or high school students may not remember they take online courses, they forget, or they procrastinate. They want to do that at the very last minute. So each student is required for an adult mentor. Adult mentor is not a content expert, it's just adult. They can be, if they take for example, Chinese course, their mentor may be math teacher. So that the math teacher just simply ask, oh, how is your online course going? Did you finish it? When is the next time you plan to do homework for this class? This kind of thing. So this is a very unique design in the States. The participants are recruited through gatekeeper at the research site. They help us publicize the survey, and almost 700 students complete the online survey. Most of them are female, and you can see most of them are high school students. There are some middle school students. They need to get permission to take high school level courses. If they are permitted, that means that they get comparable. They can take these courses because they are capable. Here is my instrument. Here, the first three is teaching presence. The instructor clearly communicate. Social presence. Here is the belongingness. I feel the personality. I feel I belong to the course. Cognitive presence is problem posts that increase my interest. So these are the major components of cognitive inquiry. Then these are the two things we kind of tweak. Online self-regulated learning strategy is based on our prior study, where we find a very strong positive impact on the learning outcome. So here, like setting goal setting is a very big thing in online language learning. Self-efficacy, they believe they can do great. We developed a mentor. We use Borob's work to do mentor presence. The mentor helped me get used to the online learning environment. So sometimes mentor also help to solve some technical issue. Satisfaction, perceived progress, and final grade, which the measure I commonly use in my study. So here is the finding. TP is teaching presence. This is social presence. This is mentor presence. This is the learning presence, efficacy. This is learning presence, self-regulated learning. This is cognitive presence, This is the first outcome, satisfaction. I have several figures that each represent one outcome. So you see, very similar to Peter Shea's finding, but we add self-regulated learning. You see that teaching presence had a positive effect on self-regulated learning, but social presence doesn't. Teaching and the social had a positive effect on the cognitive presence, which is aligned with their framework. But cognitive presence is positively correlated with the satisfaction. Social presence also did that, but the teaching presence does not. This aligns with our prior study. Teaching presence doesn't link to satisfaction. Teaching presence, this is different. In our prior study, teaching presence predict the satisfaction. Here is more like a mediation. So this is a little different from our prior study. This is satisfaction, and then we move to the next one, which is the perceived progress. For perceived progress, you see that very similar patterns. Teaching presence and mental presence predict this one, and this positively predict cognitive presence and perceived progress. For the final outcome, not a lot of things matter, but you can still see this part have the learning presence had the indirect effect on the final grade. So in these three figures together, we see that the learning presence actually supplement or expanded cumulative inquiry framework. We answer other scholars call whether learning presence can be integrated. We did methodologically, we did convergent validity and discriminant validity, and show that learning presence is different from the three components of cumulative inquiry. And prior study may run into the risk of multicollinearity, which we did not face this. We found empirical support of learning presence and learning presence act differently. Teaching presence affected self-regulated learning strategy, but social presence affected self-efficacy. So these two components acted differently, and the mechanism how these affect cognitive presence are mediated differently through the learning presence. In terms of mental presence, which is very unique in K-12 online learning in the States, mental presence predicted a self-regulated learning strategy, but it did not predict self-efficacy and did not predict learning outcome, which is understandable because mentors are not responsible for the learning outcome. They just help them to get on track. And our contribution is also to link cumulative inquiry to three types of learning outcome, which is satisfaction, perceived progress, and their final grades. So we, based on our large sample size, we provide the empirical support to cumulative inquiry. And we also illustrated how cumulative inquiry component together affected outcomes. For teaching presence, no direct and positive effect on outcomes. And it also have negative effect on perceived progress, which is probably, we are still, because at that time we did not do qualitative part. So this probably because of the design of the course and other presence have a strong explaining power. So this may explain why there is a negative effect on perceived progress. For the social presence, it positively affects satisfaction and perceived progress, but no effect on final grade. Together, they kind of affect outcomes through learning presence. So without learning presence, the picture is not complete. In order to understand students' learning outcomes, their progress, their perception, we need to include learning presence, which here I refer to self-regulated learning strategy and the motivation part. There are two major implications. The first is the essence of teaching self-regulated learning strategies. From the earlier figures, you see that teaching presence and the mental presence together predict student use of self-regulated learning strategies, and which in turn predict cognitive presence and outcomes. Self-regulated strategy explain a lot of variance in our prior studies. So online teachers sometimes focus a lot on the content and forget that telling students setting up proper goals is very helpful to ensure their success in online language learning. And the second is to design tasks and environment to increase self-efficacy. We see that the teaching and the social presence is mediated by self-efficacy. But in online learning, again, teachers may focus more on the content without noticing that they need to provide tasks or an encouraging environment that allow students to feel belonged, or they feel they can express their opinion without worrying other things. So these are the two things I think is important if you are instructor. And yeah, it's about times. And yeah, this is my last slides. And I welcome any feedback or comments or questions.